waiting. All right, I'm sorry to keep you guys waiting. I really do appreciate, again, the work the press corps is doing to make sure that people don't stop paying attention to the utter violations of law that are taking place in these buildings every single day. I'm New York City Controller Brad Lander back here for what I unfortunately think is the 10th time. I do want to start with something kind of positive because these places are so grim, so I want to show you a picture of a really sweet young man named Abdur Rahman. He was the first young man I accompanied this morning. He's a member of the DOOR, 20 years old. He's from Guinea, and he had a case over at 290 Broadway this morning. And I'm pleased to say in this one case, Abdur Rahman, the judge granted the motion that his lawyer made. He's got a case next October and is having the opportunity to seek status and is a delightful young man who's a great New Yorker. And the reason we're doing this is because the tradition of this city as the greatest immigrant city in the world is built when we make it possible for somebody like Abdur Rahman, who has separated from his family, who's 20 years old, who fears violence in his country, has the opportunity to become a New Yorker. So it is still possible for the rule of law to apply in these buildings. Unfortunately, I'll tell you just a few things from my observations today. I spent a chunk of the time in sort of an ante-room in between two courtrooms where, masked ICE officers were just mustered waiting to grab people. And a couple of people walked out. One of them said, "Oh my God, it looks like a war zone in here." Some people who are coming from countries that are, in fact, war zones. The officers hold sheafs of paper, which represent the people that they're planning to abduct. And I said, how many more today? And one of them said, I think millions. Like that's, the attitude some of the officers have. One gentleman walked out, looked to be West African, was with his lawyer, and they grabbed him and dragged him into a stairwell without asking his identity, without knowing who he was, without seeing if he matched the papers they had, separated him from his lawyer, now dragged him into a hallway. Then apparently they concluded he was not the individual that they were seeking, and they let him out downstairs where he was able to reconnect with his lawyer. But you know what law enforcement is not allowed to do is grab and abduct people with no idea who they are, separate you from your lawyer. They have no warrant, they have no case. This was someone totally, unrelated to them, who they simply feel entitled to abduct and grab. Like that is what is happening in here. And then at the end of the day, I waited in a courtroom with a judge. And what's happening now is a lot of people have gotten the ability to do virtual hearings. And so they have a virtual hearing with their lawyer. But then the individuals who don't are generally pro se. They don't have lawyers. They didn't know in many cases that they could apply for a virtual hearing. That's who's sitting in the courtroom. And so you get to the end of the sessions, which tend to end, by noon or 12:30 or 1. And you've got a room full of people. You can see the ICE officers mustered at the door, right? It's like a horrible game of justice roulette. Some people are going to walk out of that courtroom, and some people are going to be abducted and detained, and nobody knows who it will be, including the judges. In this case, because it was getting near the end of the time, for about 10 people, the judge said, okay, we're, done with our time here. So I'm going to schedule all of you for a hearing in March of 2026. I'm going to give you a court date, March 12th, 2026 for all of you. There's a Spanish language interpreter. These are all Spanish speakers. Again, about 10 people. And he then spent a long time, very patiently, explaining people's rights. Explaining that if you want to apply for asylum, you have to do it within 1 year of arrival. Explaining there may be other statuses you'll be eligible for. Thanking people for showing up today. He said, it's great that you reliably showed up in court, In fact, he said, we're going to give you printouts of your next court date. Keep that printout nearby so that if you're ever in a conversation with an ICE officer, you can show them that you showed up in court when you were supposed to and that you have a hearing date. And then he said, I really strongly urge you to get a lawyer. These are complex proceedings. You have a right to be represented in a lawyer when you come back in March 12th or in your asylum case. I urge you to get a lawyer. The government isn't going to pay for one for you, but I really hope you'll get one. He spent a long time explaining, we're giving you a piece of paper that tells you where you might go to get a low-cost or no-cost lawyer. He even name-checked the Legal Aid Society and the DOOR and other organizations that you could go to, like a half hour patiently explaining to people how they could seek their rights under this system. And he made clear they're ordered to be back here March 12th, 2026. Now, as that was ending, I raised my hand. I was not one of the members of the proceeding, but nonetheless, the judge let me ask a question. And I said, Your Honor, it's wonderful that you've spent so much time patiently explaining people's rights and that they have the right to seek asylum and that they should get a lawyer and that you're grateful that they showed up at your court date and that you've ordered them to be back here in March of 2026. But, Your Honor, you can see through the door of your courtroom that there are ICE agents who are about to abduct and detain some of these individuals, making a mockery of your courtroom, violating the order that you're giving people to show up next March, denying them the right to get an attorney. And it's not that helpful that they're going to have a piece of paper that says the court date you've just gave them. The ICE officers could hear what you just said. And I said, Your Honor, would you please ask the government not to detain people today who you've just given these next dates to? You're punishing them. If you don't do that, the government is punishing them for showing up at their court cases and making a mockery of your proceeding. Would you please ask the government not to detain them in this building right outside your courtroom? You know, the judge said, essentially, I am powerless to affect what ICE is doing. The Attorney General under Section 237 has the right to detain pretty much whoever they want. You know, it's his courtroom, all the courtrooms in this building, and, you know, I think you have immigration judges. He spent all that time patiently explaining to people what their rights are, as though in his courtroom it really matters to him what their rights are, even though outside the open door of his courtroom, those rights are about to be violated. And so sure enough, as those 10 or so people, some family members as well, after having patiently listened, walked out of the door. 4 of them were detained, 3 men, 1 woman. They're not going to have the opportunity to seek a lawyer while they're in detention. I don't know how they'll be here on March 12th, 2026, if they are either deported or still in detention. The awful Hunger Games of Justice roulette that's playing out in these buildings, where instead of the courtrooms being used as meaningful courtrooms, they're being used as abduction traps, and even judges who would like for people to comply with their orders on the rule of law are essentially being used as bait so that ICE officers can, while masked, without identifying themselves, with no judicial warrants. They may be in violation of the court order that a federal judge in California made last week. Some of these individuals may be paroled, in which case a federal judge last week has enjoined their detentions. But the ICE officers don't give a shit about the fact that they got court dates, that the judge advised them to seek a lawyer, that that case in California might enjoin the detention. None of it matters because the abductions and detention are a lawless process. That I will say, one small encouraging thing that I've seen over the last couple of weeks is that when lawyers are able to go into federal court and file habeas proceedings, in some of those cases, the federal judge, let's remember, immigration judges are not part of the judiciary. They're part of the executive branch. Part of the problem here is that The judges, the government lawyers, and the ICE agents all report to the same individual, and that individual wants millions of deportations, whether they're compliant with the rule of law or not. But in a small handful of cases where lawyers have been able to file in federal court habeas proceedings, judges have in several cases granted those habeas proceedings. And one of the individuals who I was with, I can't remember now if it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, Carlos Lopez, who I was with him and his sister in the hallway when he was detained. I was so delighted to see make the road, filed a habeas proceeding, and he was reunited with his family just a couple of days ago. That happened for those 19 and 20-year-old Queen students as well. So another thing I've said at this podium a few times before is that money that was allocated at City Hall and in Albany, $50 million each for more representation, needs to get on the ground here. And one thing it needs to do is ramp up the provision of lawyers to file habeas motions. We can see that that's working, but the vast majority of individuals being detained don't have lawyers, aren't getting habeas motions filed on their behalf, and so they are stuck in detention in Louisiana and in Texas and in Florida, or maybe they are being deported to South Sudan or El Salvador or God knows where. So amongst the many other things that we need to do, including continuing to show up here, including encouraging people to apply for virtual hearings, including encouraging people to get lawyers in advance, including doing everything we can to connect people to legal representation, is to ramp up the lawyers who file habeas motions on behalf of the individuals who are being abducted in these buildings. And I really plead with the state legislature and the governor on the state money, and with the city as well. You know, I will just say, you know, one more time, I guess here, New York City is the greatest immigrant city the world has ever known. It is because of that that the city has thrived in the way that it has. And so the fact that instead of having a mayor who is out here at this podium, who is observing what is happening, who's making sure that lawyers are provided, who's bringing a fire department or building department inspectors to the 10th floor of this building where human rights violations are taking place, but also violations of New York City's building and fire code. Instead of that, we have a mayor who's made a deal with Donald Trump and is perfectly fine with lawless deportations of New Yorkers on his watch. Mayor Adams, if you'd like to prove me wrong, come witness what's happening to New Yorkers on your watch. Get that money that was allocated in the budget out to the legal service organizations so that they can file more habeas proceedings. If you want to show that what you believe in is standing up for New Yorkers, this is the moment and this is the place to do it. Thank you very much.
Guys, any on-topic questions? Yeah.
Comptroller, your 10th time in this building observing proceedings, do you see anything different in terms of competency or frequency or aggressiveness or you did describe some positive changes?
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, the thing I described positively at the beginning was like, and actually I'll say one more word about that. When the city used to have the Asylum Application Help Center, there were some individuals who recognized that there were some young people that they might be able to help specifically. And when they shut the Asylum Application Help Center down, the door and others, picked that up and have been providing those young people support. So, that's not really, credit to the courts or to ICE or to the city. That's a credit to these amazing young volunteers and the staff at the door. I guess a couple things. There are a lot more people who are seeking virtual hearings, which is great for the people seeking virtual hearings. But the folks who are pro se, then their cases get held until the end. And it just increases the tension and the kind of like roulette nature of the thing as you're getting closer and closer to seeing who the ICE agents take. Today they took more women than they have taken on most days in the past. Still mostly men, but a few women as well. Otherwise pretty similar to recent days. Sorry? 4 detained. I talked to a few others who had seen more detentions. We saw this one individual who was grabbed, but then who was grabbed, but then and taken behind into the hallway, but then they let him go.
Brad, I want to ask you the issue of what can happen here. Does 26 federal clause have sovereign immunity? Does it fall under the city? If there was a fire here, would the FDNY have to respond?
Right.
What is the status of this building?
Yeah, I mean the building. I mean, for immigration law, immigration law is federal law. So the city can't give somebody an immigration right under federal law. But for the building code and the fire code, these buildings are in the city of New York, and the building code and the fire code apply. They have certificates of occupancy. Building inspectors have come into these buildings in the past, and yes, there is every reason to believe that what is happening on the 10th floor is a violation of New York City building code and New York City fire code, and New York City has the right to exercise its building code and fire code to send inspectors into this building to make sure that any violations are corrected. And no, the federal government can't override. Yes, I mean, the federal government's not going to send firefighters. It's our firefighters who would be expected to show up. It's our fire and building laws that apply.
So if this building was to start a congregate care facility and keep people overnight, that would be a problem. This building, can you explain the difference?
I mean, this is why the public advocate and I wrote a letter to the fire commissioner and the building commissioner and made clear to the mayor that we want building inspectors and fire code inspectors sent to the 10th floor of this building to investigate the violations of New York City law that are taking place. And the mayor's responding by sending a meaningless bullshit letter to the federal government asking them to do something when it's his laws that are being violated is punking out.
Great. Any other on-topic questions? Okay. Let's go twice. Any off-topic questions?
Yeah, I did have
Yeah.
a question. President Trump last night ended the collective bargaining rights of the Veterans Administration, hundreds of thousands of employees. This is, Sarah Nelson said this is PACO on steroids. Can you talk about why New York City, that's a union town, should be concerned about this?
I mean, let's remember who the VA staff are. These are nurses and social workers and healthcare assistants hired by the U.S. government to provide benefits to the people that have served our country in our armed forces. And then these folks agreed to sign up to provide them with health care and benefits and services. And of course they have, labor rights to collective bargaining. And the fact that the federal government would start with the VA and seek to strip away collective bargaining rights from the VA staff just gives away the game on what a lie the Trump administration is. I mean, if you would ask, who are people that Trump once upon a time said he would care about, it would be our veterans. Well, you know how you would help our veterans is by making sure the people who provide their benefits have their rights as workers, and to strip those workers' rights away, it's what my grandmother would call a shanda.
Comptroller, in light of President Trump considering whether Republicans should acknowledge the race for mayor, given the time that Democratic leaders like Senator Jeffries and Jeffries were Wade and Jordan.
Yes, it really is. I mean, I had urged all the Democratic leaders to support our Democratic nominee for mayor, Zohran Mamdani, right after he won the primary election. But it's reasonable for a period of time for people to say, I'd like to sit down with them, ask some questions. But I mean, let's be clear. Donald Trump has raised the stakes of the mayor's race. Donald Trump is saying he is going to do everything he can to prevent the Democratic nominee from being elected in November. Now, I mean, I do have questions first for Andrew Cuomo. It looks very clear to me. I mean, I know Rich Azzopartes tells he's a bad liar. That it looks pretty clear to me that there was a conversation between Trump and Andrew Cuomo, and I would like to know when it was, and I would like to know what was said, and I would like to know what, if anything, Andrew Cuomo promised in exchange for Donald Trump's clearing the right-wing, non-Democrat lane for him in November's election. But it also seems clear to me when Donald Trump has taken a side in the mayor's race, that the thing for Democratic leaders to do is to show up for the Democratic nominee for mayor. And look, this isn't just about the election in November. I mean, it is about the election in November. We should work hard. I'm working hard. I hope they'll work hard to elect the Democratic nominee. But I feel very optimistic that Zoran's going to win the election in November and be the next mayor of New York City. And Donald Trump is making very clear, how he views the fault lines. And if Donald Trump wants to, declare himself on the other side of Democrats in New York City, then it really is necessary for Democrats in New York City to stick together behind the rule of law. That's why we're out here today. Behind the city's budget. Let's not forget, Donald Trump and Elon Musk have still stolen $80 million from New York City that they haven't given back. I guess I'd like to know from Andrew Cuomo in that conversation, did you ask for the $80 million back that Donald Trump stole from the budget of the city of New York? One candidate in this race is standing up for New York Democratic values, and that's the candidate that all New York Democratic leaders should rally behind.
You mentioned that immigrants are applying for virtual court hearings. Are those immigrants getting granted? Do you know if those immigrants are getting granted those?
Much, but not all of the time. There are an increasing number of virtual hearings, so it's clear just, if you're sitting in a courtroom that more and more people are getting virtual hearings. For the most part, the people that have virtual hearings also have lawyers. Like they found, so what's mostly happening is where people can, they're finding lawyers. Everyone knows you're better off being represented by a lawyer. So, but it's not easy to get one. It's expensive. There aren't enough immigration attorneys. So it seems to me mostly what's happening is the people who get immigration attorneys, the attorneys are applying for virtual hearings, and they're mostly being granted. I have seen some cases where people asked for a virtual hearing and were told they had to come anyway. But a lot of them are being granted. But then there's this whole set of people that don't have lawyers. And so I guess they don't know that they have the opportunity to seek a virtual hearing. And so they show up pro se without lawyers and in person. And that's everybody that I saw detained today is somebody who obviously came in person, but also doesn't have a lawyer. I mentioned the one individual who had a lawyer who was ripped away from his lawyer, but he was the wrong guy. I mean, they didn't. So, yeah, and I do think I mentioned one thing that the city should be doing, which is helping file habeas proceedings for everyone who's detained and abducted and detained. But we also should be doing more to both let people know, we don't know who it is that's going to, on the docket for a case, but to get word out through communities that we encourage people to connect to council, to provide some of that city and state resources that were allocated, that $100 million for that representation, and that you have the opportunity to seek to do a virtual hearing rather than come, which you can do even if you don't have a lawyer. It's just that most people don't know how to do it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week.